Thank you very much, Eli, for the introduction. I know I'm not perfect. It's the first time I was called a midget when I came to stage, and I'll try to play that role. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. We're glad to be here in Hong Kong and tell you a bit about the Israeli venture community. I'm here together with my family, so please be kind to me and not too aggressive in your questions. There's only so much I can take. Okay, so this is forward. All right, good. So let's see that it works. Good. So again, the word most used or abused here is the concept of ecosystem, but to us in Israel, it's dramatically important because according to different surveys, we appear to have the second best ecosystem in the world after Silicon Valley, or actually it's nice to say the first one outside of the US. And very often I get questions about this ecosystem, which as you can see includes everything from entrepreneurs to venture capital funds, to academia, to multinational corporations, to government. In our case, also the army, which is very active in promoting new technologies. And very often I get questions like, how is this regulated? Or where is the control tower of this whole thing? And of course, the beauty of it is that there is no control tower, and there is no logic, and there's no sense, and it's more like a jungle or a really living ecosystem where the participants sometimes collaborate, and sometimes they compete, and sometimes they're stronger and sometimes they are weaker. And it's that sort of living, breathing animal that is the story behind the success of any venture-based economy or community, if you will. So back up and a little introduction to Israel for those of you who don't know it. So we are indeed a midget. We are a population of about 8 million, so we are roughly the size of Hong Kong in terms of the number of population. Our GDP per capita is about $36,000, which is nice. It's about same as Korea, South Korea, that is. In Western standards, we have a pretty high growth rate, which until recently was above 3% per annum. This is also fueled by the natural birth rate, which is about 3 or even more than 3 children per family. We're a good average here. We have 3 kids, so we're exactly on average. And one of the most important things that happened to us recently was that we joined the OECD. I think we were the last or next to last member. And the reason this is really important to us, because socially in Israel, whenever we try to benchmark ourselves, people always come up with excuses that Israel is different. We are not Europe, we're not Asia, we're not America, we're not this, we're not that, we're an island economy. So there are many reasons why you can avoid harsh view of your operations. Once we joined the OECD, everything is reported, everything is transparent, everything is benchmarked. And that forced us to deal in certain cases with reality and really improve where we're going to. So high-tech is really the growth engine. I think this was mentioned earlier from the academic side. I'm the first non-academic, I think, on this podium. We had, at the last count, almost 5,000 startups. A recent census that was published this quarter claims the number is actually closer to 6,000, of which almost 800 are backed by venture capitalists such as myself. We have the highest proportion per capita of startups in the world, which is why we're called the Startup Nation. I don't know how many of you have heard about the book or read the book, Startup Nation. All right. So really worth reading in demonstrating the way in which we were transformed from a very backward economy to a really post-industrial information and technology-based society. In terms of stock market and capitalization, which was mentioned earlier, our stock markets are too limited and too small to support the high-tech ecosystem. So our really home exchange is NASDAQ in New York. We have about 70 companies listed there. We are the second largest issuer on NASDAQ, which is non-American. We used to be number 1, and then we were taken over. Guess by whom? China. So we are honored to have been taken over by this giant. About 10% of our workforce works in the technology field, so this is indeed the catalyst for high-value employment in the country. And the most important statistic that you can find here, actually, is the fact that 51% of our industrial exports comes from high-tech, which is by far, the highest proportion in the world. And we have a lot of delegations coming over and asking us, how do you do that? How do you get there? Whenever they go back, we sit at home and scratch our heads and say, well, what are we going to do next? Because we've probably got to as high as we can. As you know, and this was mentioned earlier, the tech community really judges itself on exits, which are typically sales of startup companies to larger companies or IPOs on public markets. The bigger numbers are obviously the mergers and acquisitions, not the IPOs. In 2014, we had 99 exits, just short of 100, generating almost $7 billion. Now, this is an important number because on average, we invested about $2.5 billion every year in VC, which means that the industry was giving back 2.5 to 3 times the amount of capital invested there every year, which tells you that even if you put aside the social value of the industry, that it is financially very attractive. Not to all. We know that many people don't make it, but on a global basis, it's very successful, and therefore it's growing, as was mentioned regarding China, and the average investment has gone now from $2.5 billion per annum. This year it will probably be $4 billion. So a lot of money is chasing fewer and fewer deals. To mention exits, you have the list of the 10 top ones here. I'll mention Mobileye a bit later. The really important statistic here is that for the first time we have two exits to Asian companies. One is the sale of an internet phone company called Viber to Rakuten in Japan, and another one, which I had somewhere here, is the sale of a company to Singtel. Since then, we've seen more investments actually by Chinese companies, but this is a first for us, as we move from being entirely US-centric to being more global and more Asian-oriented. So one half of our industry and our society is VC, which are typically small companies, usually 20 or 30 people, all of them trying to conquer the world or change the world. The other half of the high-tech employees work for large multinational corporations who have set up operation in Israel. It says here 250, the number is probably 280 by now. And you have all the usual names, the IBMs, the Microsofts, eBays, SanDisk, and whomever you want. That's just a sample. As you see, most of them are US companies, although that again is also beginning to change. And how does it work? In one of two ways. Either a large corporation decides to establish an R&D center in Israel, or it buys Israeli companies and then sort of converts them from a company to an R&D center. So given that we are a very small nation, we have the highest density of high-tech in the world today. And actually, a lot of these companies collaborate in Israel, although they compete in the world market. For some of them, their Israeli operation is considered very strategic. I'll give you an example. Intel Corporation, there was a period that 50% of Intel's sales were based on products developed in Israel. And that is really a very telling information, because obviously Israel is not considered to be the world's most stable, geopolitically stable environment. But so be it. In other cases, if you take the case of Apple Computer, Apple basically set up its first non-US R&D center in Israel, which quickly developed from one acquisition to 3. And the same happened with Facebook and a few other companies whose first non-US operations began in Israel or in Tel Aviv. Something which has done wonders not only for the job market, but also for those who are involved in real estate. So I guess like here in Hong Kong, high-tech is the other side of the real estate coin. A lot was said here about government support. We also have quite a bit of it. It began in earnest really about 25 years ago when the government started aiding the creation of venture capital groups, probably like here in China. We had no map at the time. We didn't know really where we were going, but what we knew was that we were missing sophisticated capital to chase that. You need not read all the list here. The reason it's up here is just to demonstrate that the government is doing a good job. And as an Israeli, we usually like to criticize our governments. Unfortunately, here they've been doing a very good job, so we have to compliment them, no matter which party they belong to. I will mention two things that are very important. Their first role is to reduce the risk for private investors or for technology people as they enter new markets, new technologies, or new business model. And in that respect, they've been doing a good job. The second perception is that government, at least in Israeli case, has been very, very successful in not doing what governments usually do. And this means the following. They give you the money, or they participate in the money. It's always a private-public partnership. There's always a partnership. But they never participate in management. They never take equity. And they never take a board position. Now, this is not trivial. Think about it. Because everything, if you are a government official, everything in your body tells you that this is exactly what you should do, but they didn't do it. They've never done that, and they need to be recommended for that. Not because they're generous, because that they were smart in saying, we will reduce the risk, but we will not participate in the management or in the financial decisions and so on. Of course, if companies are successful, they're very happy to take their royalties, which is more than fair. Their participation is not just direct, but also through universities, through the army, and so on and so forth. As I was asked to provide you an analysis, rather than giving you figures about Israel, which you will forget by the coffee break, I decided to focus on 3 short case studies, which demonstrate a bit how this whole operation works. So it's really more of a demonstration. Case number 1 is the use of military technology as basically one that has dual purpose, both military and civilian. In this case, we had a company, a defense contractor, that developed a joint venture to promote its technology into civilian markets, outside of military markets. They took a vision, an image processing technology, which was used in missiles to basically identify the bad people that the missile was chasing, and converted it into a medical device company called Given Imaging. You have it downstairs, down here, which developed a pill about this size with a video camera inside. And basically a patient swallows the pill, and then the video camera transmits your intestines to the doctor, to a workstation. So the first use of the technology was to kill people, the other one is to cure them. So on average, I think we're doing good. So this is a case of using hardcore military technology. A second example is basically using military-based talent, people who went to the military, who were technology leaders in projects, who got very high level of responsibilities at a very young age, on average 20, 21, 22, and then left the army to do their own thing, basically using the information, the knowledge they gathered, but not taking any technology from the army, not taking a single line of code, but just their intelligence and their understanding. That's what they told you, sir. Yeah, actually it was debated. By the way, you never pay a license to the army, so that's cheap technology development. So here's the case of a company called Checkpoint, which is the world's leader, actually, in cyber technology. We are in cyber port or cyber city, so it's a good thing. It has a market cap of $15 billion. I am very proud to be a member of their board, although I have nothing to do with their success. Basically, they laid 20 years ago, they began cyber by developing the first firewalls that we all use day in, day out. And basically, this in its own self created the whole industry in Israel, which is the cyber industry. Of course, this is promoted by our unique security situation, where a lot of people are trying to raid us or shut down our computer systems. And that created a cyber ecosystem within itself. So we have ecosystems within the mega ecosystem. In this case, as you know, cyber is hot now. Everybody wants to go there. A lot of companies. And just a demonstration, other than other Israeli companies, we've had a lot of international companies set up their cyber operations in Israel. Microsoft has done 3 acquisitions there. EMC has about 1,000 people, I think, in Israel. eBay, IBM. GE is doing their industrial cyber in Israel, which is a totally different kind of cyber, protecting strategic platforms like power plants, for example, nuclear power plants, and so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, GM is also doing that for automotive cyber. This is an Israeli company that recently went public. And interestingly enough, this is where the government comes back. We have a city in the south of the country, in the middle of the desert, called Beersheba. This used to be where the patriarch of our nation, Abraham, the father of nations, used to have his tent and his sheep and his goats. And now we're trying to convert it to the cyber capital of the world. So basically, we're trying to push old cyber to create a totally new ecosystem and a totally new city. And the third example that I'd like to promote to you has no bearing to the army, just an industry that came out of nowhere, a company called Mobileye that went public last year, I think. It provides vision-based sensors and components that are placed on your cars and basically alert the driver in case he's next to a collision. So it's a collision avoidance technology, which is presumably saving lives. It's based on image processing that was licensed from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So we have now a link rather than army, one coming from the university. It was the biggest IPO Israel ever had. The IPO began, I think, at $5 billion, and the company is now worth about $10 billion, a year and a half later. It's a world leader in the automotive market, and it already is OEMing to 18 companies, and to be featured in over 200 different car models worldwide, making it the number one. And as you can see in bold, the really interesting part is Israel does not have heavy industry. We have no automotive background or industry. We once tried to develop an Israeli car that was a disaster. It was made out of fiberglass. And
by the camel.
It was eaten by camels. Anyway, but very, very bad experience. So we usually buy our cars from Korea, from Japan, from wherever. So these guys developed an industry that had no logic, because it had no base information, no partners, no base from within which to grow, which is really the essence of tech and the ability to do things out of the box. Their next products will be in the autonomous car domain, and they claim that they're even ahead of Google at that. I'll skip some of the other examples of technologies coming out of Israel and move you to the last topic, which is trends. Where are we going? What are the real issues that govern us, and maybe one or two of our challenges? I'll have 1 minute. It'll be a long minute, but it will be 1 minute. So one thing that was mentioned here, I think, before me, although the majority of capital flowing into the industry used to come from VCs, and in our case, mostly international VCs, this is changing. The light-colored bar here is the non-VC part of exits. And actually, the biggest change we've seen is the growth in multinational corporations, all of them looking for more and more innovation and investing more and more in tech. Their investment takes different forms, all the way from accelerators, incubators, joint ventures, distribution agreements, and investment in VCs and so on. So that's becoming a very, very distinct form. Indeed, international corporations are learning to open up to innovation rather than to go in a sort of not invented here kind of syndrome. A second trend, I think, that was mentioned before me is what we call high-tech for low-tech. So whereas high-tech began its life in what we call high-tech domains, it is now moving to the everyday life of basic industry and basic services. Fintech was mentioned earlier, technology for retail, interacting with the consumer, finding him or her on Facebook, and that kind of thing. Agrotech for food, food safety, food improvement. We now opened the first incubator in Israel for food tech, which is really exciting. I'm on the board there. And you don't want to know what you'll be eating in 5 years from now. And the problem is that they make us taste some of this stuff. And the last time we had it was something made out of flies that were converted into food. Anyhow, I'll leave that for another thing. Water was mentioned earlier. We have very little water in Israel. So we have a lot of companies that work on water purification, water security, water improvement, and desalination. We have the highest proportion in the world of desalination of seawater, which is interesting because this is a unique story where water has moved from being a natural resource that you just take from nature to a manufactured product. So we know the cost per unit, we manage it, and we no longer have a water shortage, so much so that we now export water to Jordan, our neighbor. Of course, technology for energy, and not to forget biotech, medical, and of course, the area of digital health. As my belief, like many other people, that the big next wave is going to be the convergence between digital technology and medicine, as all of us try to grow to be 100 years old, beautiful, young forever, and so on and so forth. Not knowing how we'll finance this when we grow old, but nevertheless we'll be good looking. And the third trend is to us, China. Now, this is extremely important because, as I told you, we grew up in our industry in being very US-centric, which means money came from the US, US was the target market, US was where we did our IPOs, and US is where the companies that bought our companies were domiciled. Now, clearly, all of that is beginning to change with having a more Asia, China type of focus, and that's beginning. But we don't really know how to do that. So people are trying. We are seeing, like many things in high tech, that there is no real roadmap. Most of the people in the industry, such as myself, are concerned whenever we have a company that wants to go to China. Most of our technologies were designed on what we call design to perform, which means high-end high-performance systems. We don't have much knowledge in design to cost, how to make things really cheap and low masses. So there's a lot we need to learn. Obviously, many people are concerned by the IP situation in China, by competition, by answering a question, can you keep your technology? There are certain ideas and certain concepts beginning there, but it's just the beginning. We are seeing investments coming from China. We're seeing Chinese companies buy Israeli companies, anywhere from food to insurance to financial services. And we've seen people like Alibaba, like Baidu, make their first VC investments in Israel, both into funds as well as outside funds. So we are indeed looking for a model here. It will probably be a new kind of model, not like the American one, but we're not quite sure what it would look like. And the last but not least on this, if you ask us, okay, all this is well and fine, don't you guys have any problems? And the answer is we do. And if I was to mention one here, is the unbelievable limitation we are experiencing today on manpower. So the industry can't get enough people. Our immigration policy does not allow to have people coming into the country, so we're very limited on that. We don't have the benefit of the US model, as you mentioned it earlier, Eli. So we are doing two things. We're trying to encourage young people to go into tech, into science, tech, and physics, especially girls, because only 10% of employees in high tech are women. So that is a big pool that, if we're able to address, can do wonders for us. We also try to look at Orthodox minorities, Arab minorities, and by the way, especially in software, we write a lot of code outside of Israel, primarily in Eastern Europe. But that can go on forever. So I'm sure there's a way to collaborate here. We are not short on innovation, and we're not short on the single most important asset that you need in this business, which is the willingness of individuals to take risk. Absent that, you have no industry. With that, you have everything. So I think that concludes my comments on that, and thank you for being patient with me. Thank you.